the chief advisor to Bangladesh's government, Nobel laureate Professor Modi-Yunus. They just met, and these images have just been released from that BIMSTEC summit. So the Prime Minister is flanked by KP Sharma Oli, the Prime Minister of Nepal on one side, and Professor Modi-Yunus on the other in these pictures. So the Prime Minister is likely to have a meeting with Professor Modi-Yunus tomorrow. At least that's what reports from Dhaka suggest. Initial reports seem to indicate that while Dhaka was very keen on a one-on-one, a bilateral, but that request was initially not taken well by India. There was some delay in response because of tensions between the two countries. BIMSTEC, as you well know, is a 7-nation regional organization. So Bangladesh, India, Bhutan, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Thailand, they're all a part of this very crucial grouping in this region, and they focus on fostering technical and economic cooperation around the Bay of Bengal. Now let's quickly listen in to what Bangladesh's Foreign Secretary Mohammad Jashimuddin had to say a short while back about the likely meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Professor Modi-Yunus.
Expecting a meeting between Professor Yunus and Indian Prime Minister Modi. Has there been any request from your side for a meeting?
There has been a request from our side, and we certainly hope that this will take place.
I want to quickly cut across to India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan joining us for more on the story. Also with us is Professor Brahma Chilani. Geeta, quickly, what do we expect from this meeting? Bangladesh had sought this meeting. What do we expect from it?
Well, there was a lot of talk about whether if there's going to be a meeting or not. Yes, India waited a while. Remember, the remarks made by Professor Yunus did not go down well with New Delhi, and there was a response by Dr. Jaishankar in his statements that he made at BIMSTEC about the Northeast, that it is not just landlocked, it is the hub. It is the hub for and stands right in the middle of connectivity when it comes to South Asia and Southeast Asia. So that's one response by India. But yes, right now, Bangladesh certainly is an important nation for India, and India will engage whoever is in control of Dhaka. And that's the reason why the meeting is taking place. Top on the agenda for India is going to be Indian interests, securing Indian interests in Bangladesh, but also more importantly, the issue of minorities and safety of minorities in Bangladesh. Okay. That also is going to be part of the conversation when Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets with Professor Modi-Yunus.
Professor Chilani, how would you view the Bangladesh request for a one-on-one with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and what do we expect in terms of an outcome? More than just a handshake when they meet?
Gaurav, Bangladesh is slipping into violent jihadism under Yunus. Yunus has released terrorists and Al-Qaeda sympathizers from prisons. The Islamists in Bangladesh are working to remake society, including overturning the secularism that has largely defined Bangladesh since its independence from Pakistan. Today, those who sponsored and supported the 1971 Bangladesh genocide are calling the shots. In fact, the Yunus regime has in its Council of Advisors or the Council of Ministers Islamists. But by releasing violent Islamists and terrorists from jail, Yunus has set in motion the radicalization of Pakistani society. More importantly, the Yunus regime has also whipped up anti-India sentiment. So a Modi-Yunus bilateral at this stage, before Yunus has made any course correction, would send an unfortunate message.
That's a very pertinent point you make. But if that meeting is held, as Bangladesh seems to be confirming, can India send across that very strong message? This slide into radicalism is a cause for concern for India and must be checked forthwith, or will that be water off a duck's back when it comes to the jihadists in Bangladesh and Professor Yunus, heading the country for now?
Gaurav, as you know, that since last August, since the time when violence was unleashed against minorities, especially the Hindus. The Modi government has done little more than issue occasional statements, and those statements have done little to contain attacks on minorities. So any kind of stern message that Modi might seek to send to Dhaka will actually be seen in Dhaka as India accommodating the Yunus regime, because this bilateral meeting between Yunus and Modi will be seen by Islamists in Bangladesh as well as Yunus and his ilk as India coming around to accepting the Yunus regime.
That's a very, very interesting perspective, and we'll keep an eye on that story very closely.
I call this kind reciprocal. This is not full reciprocal. This is kind reciprocal. But what we do is we cut it in half. We charge them. My answer is very simple. If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America.
So US President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariff plan has taken the world by storm. Donald Trump slapped what he calls discounted tariff on multiple countries across the world, including India. So that's the chart that he put out, from China to European Union to Vietnam. Let's take this country specific. Let's talk about India first. So it's 27% reciprocal tariff that's been imposed on India. He calls it discounted tariff in return for India's imposition of 52% tariff on US imports, as he put it. Let's now talk about China. It's 34%. Vietnam has been hit by 46%, Taiwan by 32%. Let's now next talk about Vietnam. Like we told you, it's 46%. Japan is 24%. A close ally, 24%. South Korea. South Korea faces 26%. European Union, 20%. And European Union is now talking about the retaliatory measures that they intend putting in place. Switzerland's been slapped with 31%, but Switzerland says we will not be reacting to this. United Kingdom, 10%. Again, it's the same, so there's no confrontation there. Cambodia, a massive 49%, and this is the impact on supply chain countries. China supply chain countries, Bangladesh. Remember, Professor Modi-Yunus was talking about in Beijing that you manufacture in Bangladesh and then export to the United States? Well, good for them. 37% has been imposed on Bangladesh. Sri Lanka, 44%. So the US is very clear. China's supply chain countries also will be bearing the brunt. Madagascar, 44%. So these are the tariffs that have been imposed on different countries across the world by President Trump.
Blame former presidents and past leaders who weren't doing their job. They let it happen, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. Thank you. Johnson & Johnson, great company, $55 billion. Eli Lilly, $27 billion. Meta is investing $500 billion. Wow. DeMac is investing $20 billion. CMA, CGM, $20 billion. And then you have Merck and Clarios, Stellantis, General Motors, GE Aerospace, Honda, Nissan, Hyundai are all putting in billions and billions of dollars, and they're committed 100%. Likewise to all of the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, and everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exemptions from these tariffs, I say, terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies. They manipulate their currencies like nobody can even believe, which is a bad, bad thing and very devastating to us, and start buying tens of billions of dollars of American goods. Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before.
So US President Donald Trump has announced 27% reciprocal tariffs on India. Calling Prime Minister Narendra Modi a great friend, Donald Trump said India's tariffs are tough and they have not been treating the United States right. But there is a big silver lining for India. There are several exports that are exempt from these tariffs, and this includes pharmaceutical products, semiconductor chips, copper, lumber, and other critical material. India is analyzing and weighing possible opportunities as a result of these tariffs. Yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. Aapada mein avsar.
Yeah, very, very tough. Very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing. For years and years, the United States charges other countries only a 2.4 tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher prices, like 60%. India charges 70%. Vietnam charges 75%, and others are even higher than that. Likewise, until today, the United States has for decades charged a 2.5 tariff. Think of that, 2.5% on foreign-made automobiles. The European Union charges us more than 10% tariffs, and they have 20% VATs, much, much higher. India charges 70%, and perhaps worst of all are the non-monetary restrictions imposed by South Korea, Japan, and very many other nations. As a result of these colossal trade barriers, 81% of the cars in South Korea are made in South Korea. 94% of the cars in Japan are made in Japan. Toyota sells 1 million foreign-made automobiles into the United States, and General Motors sells almost none. Ford sells very little. None of our companies are allowed to go into other countries.
देखिए यूएस का काम है, उनका अमेरिका फर्स्ट है, ट्रम्प साहब का, तो मोदी जी के लिए इंडिया फर्स्ट है. अब उसकी हम लोग समीक्षा करेंगे, फिर क्या उसका असर पड़ेगा, कैसे उससे निपटना देखा जाएगा.
और सर आगे की रणनीति गवर्नमेंट की क्या होगी
अब जरा टैरिफ देखा जाए, उसको फिर विचार किया जाए, फिर देखा जाएगा क्या करना होगा.
Hours after the US president announced his reciprocal tariffs, markets in India reacted with alarm, only to recover later in trade. The revelation that sectors like pharmaceutical, copper, energy and bullion and precious metals have been exempted from the tariffs energized investors. All these sectors are big contributors to the export kitty. The first phase of new tariffs on India will kick from 5th April. The rest, 17%, will go into effect from 10th April. They will exclude vehicle and auto spare parts as well as steel and aluminium, which already attract 25% tariffs. Exporters feel the tariff put India in a better position than its big competitors, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam and others.
26% is quite consumable by the exporters, because it is, this I am telling because the tariff imposed on the other countries, our competitive countries, China, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, I mean, which are our competitive countries, this is much less. But the advantage China had on the cheap raw material, that advantage is gone. I think this is good. India should be thankful to tariff, not to impose more.
The US has been the largest export market for India in the past few years. What also made India a prime target for the tit-for-tat tariffs is the huge trade surplus India enjoys with the US. Opposition rained fire on the Modi government over the 27% US tariffs.
Our ally suddenly decides to impose taxes or tariffs on us, 26%, which is going to completely devastate our economy. Our auto industry, our pharmaceutical industry, they're all on the line. The BJP and the RSS have a different philosophy. When asked, do you lean left or do you lean right? They say, no, no, no. We bow our head right in front of every foreigner that comes in front of us. Sir, this is something that is in their culture. It is in their history. We know that.
अमेरिका ने 26% का रेसिप्रोकल टैक्स लगाया है भारत के ऊपर।
उसी से तो ध्यान हटाने के लिए ड्रामा है और किस लिए है? अमेरिका के सामने तो घुटना टेक सरकार है ये ना, तो उससे तो लड़ नहीं पाते, तो चलो यहाँ मुसलमानों से लड़ो।
Politics aside, economists too have been apprehensive about the impact of the US reciprocal tariffs on the Indian economy. Prior to the imposition of tariffs, economists had projected a 10 to 30 basis point hit to India's GDP growth from the US tariffs, in part due to export restrictions and in part because of the economic uncertainty. Bureau Report, India Today.
So at the Rose Garden in the White House, US President Donald Trump dropped the global tariff bomb at 1:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. The US shock and awe campaign is well known, but this is being described as shock and horror with the world on tenterhooks. The Spanish Prime Minister was quoted saying that tariffs are a unilateral attack by the US on Europe, but 27% tariffs on India. President Trump calls it discounted reciprocal tariffs. What does this mean for India? Is there an opportunity here for India? Aapada mein avsar, opportunity in an adverse situation. What will the impact be on India, China, EU, the US? We'll talk about that in greater detail. Joining me on this India Today special broadcast is Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor, Business Today. Geeta Mohan is India Today's Foreign Affairs Editor. Professor Brahma Chilani, former advisor to India's National Security Council, somebody who keeps a hawk eye on developments here. And P.N. Vijay joins us as an investment banker, investment guru on this special broadcast. And Geeta, the Department of Commerce in a statement said they're carefully examining the implications of various measures and announcements made by the President of the US. They're also studying opportunities that may arise due to this development. Now, what are the opportunities that India is looking at? Or are we to understand that we are going to cope till a BTA or a bilateral trade agreement is reached perhaps by fall?
Well, Gaurav, it's both. Like you said, opportunity and adversity. And that's what is going to happen over here. Let's zoom out a little. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is at the BIMSTEC summit in Thailand. And the message from there has been about how to diversify and ensure that there are alternatives. So is India going to become an alternative? We're speaking to people from Thailand, trade representatives of the government, Umesh Pandey, and he said that this is really an opportunity where the Southeast Asian and South Asian countries can come together, look at alternatives, look at not just in terms of manufacturing, but also markets to ensure that that all the countries are able to absorb the shock of these reciprocal tariffs. So India is going to or can become a major player here. Is it going to be an uphill task? Yes. But the other thing also has to do with the fact that there's some exemptions we've got. There's some others that are going to be hit hard. But for India, there is this is a moment. This is a time period which is locked up until fall, when the BTA has to be signed, as was announced by the leaders of the country.
Siddharth,
and once the BTA.
Okay, Siddharth, let's talk about the impact on India specifically. As bad as was expected, worse, or with exemptions, as Geeta was mentioning, for pharmaceuticals, energy, semiconductors, copper, some minerals. Is there a silver lining here?
Well, before I answer the direct question on India, let me provide you an update with what is happening even as we speak in the US stock markets. Very clearly, these tariffs have shaken US companies to the core. There's a bloodbath happening all across stock markets in the United States and elsewhere, depending on which time zone you lived. Markets all over have lost trillions of dollars, and perhaps this will be one of the worst single-day losses that the United States market will see, and that will in turn feed into emerging markets and economies like India as well. On your question with regard to the India impact, look at the tariff slabs. It starts at 10%, that is now a universal slab. No one escapes 10%, including those countries that have for decades allowed the US to export into their markets at 0%. You may be an ally, you may have a free trade agreement, you may have a most favored nation, you may have bent over backwards, you may have allowed American bases to be set up, you might have supported the American war machine. Nothing, nada, nothing works. 10%. And that goes up from 10 to as much as 60%. At the top end is China. And you know, India is somewhere in the middle. It's actually 27%. So you could say for India, it's a halfway house. The government has called it a mixed impact. And here is what is at the center of it. For India, the trade relationship with the United States is very significant. Okay. Equally significant is the security and wider strategic cooperation relationship. And it's very clear, Gaurav, for months now in the run-up after Trump took office, the recent actions and what will now come, India is making all effort to ensure that the impact is minimal. There are, of course, multiple options before us to diversify our trade, but for now, there will be an impact. But I think India is somewhere in the middle of what is a world war as far as the global tariff order is concerned.
That's a strong word. It's a world war when it comes to tariffs. There are some commentators, Professor Chilani, who've even used terms like harakiri. Is that what has happened? Do you see this as a world war? Let's talk about the bigger picture, but I also want your opinion, Professor Chilani, on what this means for India. The reciprocal tariff, a clear indication that India and US must push for BTA by fall?
Well, first, on the larger issue, tariffs are front and center on Trump's agenda as he seeks to revamp the global trading regime in an effort to secure American advantage. He is seeking to beat back the flood of imports and force American companies to invest in domestic production capacity and bring supply chains back to the US. So he is expecting short-term pain to be inflicted on Americans due to his tariff-related actions. But he is deploying tariffs both as a negotiating instrument to extract concessions from trading partners, and some of the trading partners have already wilted under his pressure or threats. But some of his tariffs are also going to stay in place as a regular source of revenue for the US to help cut the US trade deficit and balance the budget. In relation to India, Trump's tariff threat and then his actual slapping of tariffs on India have put India on the defensive and so these tariffs have compounded India's dilemma because, like the US, India has an overall trade deficit with the world, a large trade deficit with the world. But while the US trade deficit with the world makes up about 4% of its economy, India's overall trade deficit makes up more than 10% of its economy. So this additional tariff burden that Trump has imposed on India, as well as what it means for India, will compound India's challenges in the near term.
Okay, so our challenges are going to multiply, perhaps be compounded in near term, as you say, Mr. Vijay. Donald Trump refers to Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a close friend. In the same breath, he speaks of high tariffs that India imposes and then imposes 27% reciprocal tariff. Now, compounds India's problems. Would you look at it as a mixed bag? Would you look at it as a setback? How does it impact various sectors in our country? Gems and jewelry, for example, where there are some apprehensions, there could be massive job losses.
Well, let's look at the threat and then the opportunity. First, the threat. Let us look at the math. We exported about $85 billion of goods. Services are outside the tariff right now. Out of this $85 billion, if you take away pharma and energy products, which have been exempted from tariffs, it's about $60 billion. And 27% of that is about $15 billion US, which is about 0.3% of the Indian GDP. which is, in my view, pretty insignificant. Just to compare, a bad monsoon will have an impact of about 2% on the Indian GDP. So in terms of impact, a lot of the hoo-ha is not based on facts.
Okay.
Secondly, the people who turn around and say, that's fair enough, and as the other speaker was just saying, we have this 3% fall in the stock markets in Europe and US. Clearly, there is fear of a US recession, and that might translate into a global recession. Well, it's very early to talk about such things. It's possible, but right now it's too premature to talk about such things. Right now, the US economy is in pretty good shape. So the first point is, as far as these tariffs are concerned, the direct impact on India is relatively less. China, for example, exported $450 billion to the US. Bangladesh is facing a much bigger tariff. Vietnam is facing a much bigger tariff. In fact, the textile stocks in the Indian stock market hit the upper circuit today, as this was seen as a great opportunity for Indian textiles to get back into the game.
Very interesting. You should point that out. Go on, sir. Complete your point.
If you look at the bigger picture, we talked about it in another program. We reformed in 91 because of the bad economy and the IMF threat. Probably this is an opportunity for India to look inwards. Everybody knows about the 90 compliances that a company has to go through before it can export $1 of goods out of India. We know about the Inspector Raj. Probably this is a good time for Prime Minister Modi to blame Trump, to use Trump and set the Indian house in order in terms of use of doing business, in terms of making India more export competitive. Look at the gems and jewelries, which you just now mentioned.
Yes.
90% of the component of gems and jewelry is imports. We get raw, uncut diamonds on which these people have to pay a huge import duty, which is why the price is high. Now, India has to look inward. It doesn't matter whether Trump is a good guy or a bad guy, whether he says things are ripped apart. That's all, that's all talk. But we have to look and say, are we justified in putting this duty on Harley Davidson, on Bourbon? Yes. Whom is it helping? Whom is it helping? What is all this? Vestiges of old socialist days that we...
Very interesting perspective, and several people have, you're rightly pointing this out. Are we too protectionists in your appreciation also, Siddharth? Is it time for India to open up? This is the Apada Mein Avsar for Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, it is true that in the past 10-11 years, we have followed in some sectors a policy of import substitution, laptops being just one example where we had put some curbs. Make in India is the overall rubric framework under which Prime Minister Modi has over 2 successive terms tried to encourage domestic employment creation and enhance manufacturing capacities in India. But will Make in India suddenly become Make in America? No, that's not going to happen. What is the way out really? Empirical data and multi-decade data suggests that any economy which has lower moderate tariffs is able to grow at a faster pace, because import substitution is not easy to do. There is technology denial, there is lack of capital, there is lack of expertise, just to give those as a reason. I think what is very clear is that for India and India-specific efforts that have been made in terms of protecting our trade, there is a delicate balancing act that will have to happen. One quick point, Gaurav. The worst affected is Asia and South Asia.
Yes.
A country like Vietnam. And I just want to throw one example for our panel and for you. Nike has dozens of factories in Vietnam. It is said to employ almost 450,000 people in that country. If you look at that stock and if you look at the tariff impact, Nike will have to rejig its half of its entire operation. So this is going to be cataclysmic. Will India benefit? Can other companies now come to India because we are somewhere in the middle, move away from high tariff zones? And finally, the absurdity of the calculation is also apparent. Lesotho has been hit with 50% tariffs. So I think, as our panelists are saying, we will get greater clarity. But the big picture is that what Mr. Trump seems to be doing is to upend 40 years of outsourcing within less than 4 months of his tenure. I don't think it's going to even pan out fully in 4 years of his term.
Is there a genuine apprehension, Professor Chilani, before I bring in Geeta, is there a genuine apprehension this could lead to recession, as many, including Barclays, they have this apprehension and they've assessed that there's high risk of recession in the US. And given India's $35 billion trade surplus with the US in 23-24, how much of this tariff is genuinely about creating a level playing field or reducing that surplus? And how much of it is a political signal to appease his voters, the domestic US interests, sir?
Trump is seeking to do what he promised during the election campaign. He's also doing what he said he would do in his inaugural speech. He said in his inaugural speech that he will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich Americans. Now, this is what he's seeking to do now. And he has not ruled out recession in the short term. So he understands the risks of what he's doing. But I think the country that is going to bear the brunt of Trump's tariffs is China.
Yes.
The focus has been on 34% tariffs that Trump announced on China. We should not forget that he's also slapped 2 rounds of 10% tariffs on China since February. That's 54% in all. Add to that the up to 25% tariffs on China that Trump imposed in his first term. Then Joe Biden also imposed some tariffs on China during his presidency. So the tariffs on China now, US tariffs on China, are approaching 80%. So China will clearly bear the brunt of America's tariff war. And for India, this imposition of tariffs by Trump is an opportunity only in relation to China. India has run a huge trade deficit with China that it has partly offset by running a trade surplus with the United States. But now, India finally has to resort to raising tariffs on imports from China. So far, it has allowed imports from China to flood its market.
Yes.
Even non-essential items have flooded Indian market. The Modi government has done nothing to stop non-essential imports from China flooding the Indian market. At least Modi can borrow a leaf from Trump's book by raising tariffs on non-essential imports from China.
Because there are very sweet words coming from China, and I'll come to China in greater detail in just a moment here. And Geeta also has a big smile on her face, because Geeta, if I may quickly, President Xi Jinping, he's said the sweetest things when it comes to India-China relationship, and said, these are countries that need to sink their differences. The tango that he talks about between the dragon and the elephant, neighbors should find ways to coexist peacefully. And he's ready to deepen communication and coordination on major international affairs. Is all of this aimed in a way at trying to wean India a little away from the United States of America? And is that even possible?
Well, not possible to wean India away from America completely, because India is engaged. India knows what it needs to do. Like we've been reporting, there is a BTA conversation and negotiations that are underway. Not to forget, Gaurav, there are Chinese troops still sitting where they shouldn't be. The withdrawal and disengagement is not complete. So China, at this point in time, while India should be looking at opportunities, China is pushing for those opportunities and trying to ensure that the Asian giants, particularly massively growing economic power such as India, looks to China, looks to Beijing. India is going to do all it can to ensure that the brunt of these tariffs are not felt by consumers in India, by the people of India, and therefore will engage China and is engaging China, but not because it's looking at Beijing's interests, it's looking at Indian interests.
Okay.
It is in India's interest to engage all countries, including China, till the time that we don't figure out how to balance
The deficit.
reciprocal tariff,
Yes.
and the reciprocal tariff war, so to say, and the brunt of that will be felt for the in the coming months. So,
Before I bring in PN Vijay once again, Siddharth, India continues to import even non-essentials from China, and this has been an argument over years and years, and especially after Galwan, that we really need to reduce imports from China. Why is it that, fine, essentials you need to bring in, why are we still importing non-essentials, and how do you view the sweet words that suddenly come from Chinese President Xi Jinping?
Let me try and answer that question indirectly. As we've been digesting and dissecting this announcement by President Trump, it's clear that China is not being targeted directly alone. It's also being targeted indirectly. There are Southeast Asian countries where a lot of Chinese capital and manufacturing activity happens, which then gets exported to the United States. So there will therefore be a significant clampdown on direct exports and indirect exports, because remember, China has a massive footprint across the world. It soaks up commodities and puts out finished products through multiple countries. That's been its trade strategy. Vietnam and Cambodia are just two examples of that. Therefore, what does that mean for India? If different countries and producers are going to de-risk from China, then we could be beneficiaries. But remember, Gaurav, this question of China plus one came up originally after COVID. And there was a lot of discussion that the supply chain needs to have, a backup and therefore come to India. Not much has happened. Why has it not happened? The jury is out on that. But I would say that for India, this is an opportunity for a big bang opening up, a big bang deregulation, making it easier for investors to come in, not just through headline changes of FDI limits, but for actually the ease of doing business, opening business, running businesses on the ground. And like you and I know, the traffic blocks that we face in our mega cities are akin to the traffic blocks that large corporations, medium-sized, small corporations face in India. There is a compliance Raj that exists in this country even 35 years after the original license Raj was dismantled.
And this is the test case, because when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was sworn in for the first time in 2014, his visit to Japan, and I'd reported on that visit to Japan, he'd spoken of ease of doing business in India, a special office being created in the Prime Minister's office to ensure single window clearance. Why is all of that not happening? Or if it's happening, why is it not being seen as effective? Mr. Vijay, the Chinese yuan dropped to its lowest level in weeks. China, and as Siddharth was mentioning, the Chinese supply chain countries, they are being hit hard. China is warning of retaliatory measures. Now, is this going to lead to an escalation, a trade war? Will that have a domino effect on the economy? And is this once again, Aapada mein avsar for India, an opportunity in adversity for India?
There is surely going to be a lot of problems in global trade with all these duties slapped on Asian countries, especially China and countries which are very close to China in the supply chain. That's for sure. And we really don't know where it will end, who will bend first, who will walk the talk, and so on, even EU. Where does this leave India? I really feel that if India plays its cards right, India can come out as a major winner. After all, we have very good relationship with the US, over time. That's a big plus point. Secondly, in terms of competitiveness, India can be as competitive. We have a huge knowledge pool. We have a huge domestic market to supplement manufacturing. We have everything going for us, except the overburden of government controls, government compliances. So if we can get our act together, I see no reason why we cannot have a multiple jump in India's exports to the US, even to China. I think the mindset should not be China is, we are getting all sorts of unnecessary things from China. We should stop that. That's the old Nehruvian socialism mindset.
Okay.
That's what we did from 1947 to 1991. Oh, this is not essential. We'll stop it. So we had Fiat cars and Ambassador cars. You remember that?
Yep.
So that is this essential? What we have to think of is the Indian consumer. If the Indian consumer is paying less for buying a lamp which comes from China, why not? So it is for India to make better lamps at a cheaper price. So I think the story for the Indian business is, I think Indian business, to be honest, has got pampered a lot. What is the production-linked incentives? We are giving such huge companies so much of taxpayers' money for what? How much employment have they created? Is there data to show that all that money, taxpayers' money, has created jobs in India? Can we say PLI is a success? In what terms? So I think it is for India Inc. also to look in and how to become more globally competitive. I think that is the story here.
So that's a very pertinent point. For decades we were compelled to buy the Fiats and the Ambassadors. Maruti was a revolution. But even now, if the GMCs and the Fords or the Japanese cars, they come in and there are cheaper prices, electric cars come in which are cheaper, then let our automobile companies be equally good. Of course, you would perhaps need to give them a little protection, till the time they come up to scale. Or is it enough of protection so far?
When the Bombay club was dismantled after the 91 reforms, in some ways Indian industry had some challenge. From then to now, you used auto as an example. Let's look at the auto sector. We have a very significant and robust auto manufacturing and auto component manufacturing base in this country. If you look around this region, barring China, I would argue that we have one of the strongest auto manufacturing bases in this country. This is the result of almost 40 years of calibrated policy making and decision making. Yet today, the dominant auto companies by market share in India are all foreign owned. Suzuki, Hyundai, look at Toyota. There was a time where industrial policy and FDI restrictions allowed for joint ventures. Now 100% foreign owned companies. This is just one example, Gaurav, of how it has panned out over the years. Should we have opened up and become a basket economy like some of our neighbors, where they can't even manufacture wheelbarrows or three-wheelers? No, we should not have. The fact is that there's been a trade policy of 40 years that included India joining the WTO far ahead of China. I think we are now at a pivotal moment, and that's why I say, you use that term, Abda mein avsar. I think turning that into reality will be the biggest expectation now on this government and our Prime Minister and Commerce Minister and all the other officials.
Very, very interesting. And what's heartening is there's hope that yes, there's a threat, but there's also an opportunity. Geeta, trade ministers of China, Japan and South Korea, they've been meeting and strategizing a way to deal with the impact of reciprocal tariffs. And Donald Trump specifically referred to automobiles. And since we're staying with automobiles for a moment that are manufactured in Japan and South Korea, he said only 2.5% tariff is what they pay on exports to America. Almost no GMC vehicles or Ford vehicles are sold either in Japan or in South Korea. So how are countries like China, Japan and South Korea negotiating through these headwinds?
Well, Gaurav, Donald Trump had a very important statement when he said that there are unfair trade practices that America has been facing and suffering from allies and adversaries, enemies. But particularly, the allies are far worse. And in such a scenario, you're looking at countries that are better coming together and looking at how to weather the storm of reciprocal tariffs coming in from the United States of America. It was after 5 long years of a hiatus that we saw these countries coming together and having a conversation, negotiating on a trade. And that in itself is a huge thing. So the question that America should be looking at and should seek answers of is Are these policies, is he making these countries come closer, and will that help America in the longer run? Japan, China, South Korea coming together. He does have a point. Ford shut shop in India. So yes, there is going to be a lot of arm twisting in manufacturing moving to the Rust Belt and a revival of the Rust Belt in the United States of America. But at what cost?
Professor Chilani, the last 30 seconds I have on this part of the show, I just want to understand from you. Yes, we have a $35 billion trade surplus if we were to look at last year's figures. But was there another way to offset that? Import more energy, get more defense hardware. We're looking for fighter jet engines that were delayed. So critical technology delayed. All of that, were those better ways of negotiating instead of this?
Well, there are two things that we should bear in mind, that in terms of the US-India trade, three items besides services dominate US-India trade. One is oil and petroleum products, second is military equipment, and third is gems.
Yes.
So the scope for further imports of American oil and petroleum products is limited, given the fact that the Americans don't provide discounts to India or any other country, but India still is increasing imports of American energy resources. But look at the larger picture. India is an import-dependent economy, not an export-driven economy. This is very unlike other major Asian economies.
Yes.
India, unlike most other Asian economies, has a domestically oriented economy that relies on domestic consumption, not exports for its growth. And then all this talk about tariffs and export competitiveness, we should not forget that many of our exports rely on imported inputs.
Yes.
So when the rupee depreciates, even our export competitiveness suffers.
Gets adversely impacted.
But I think the bigger issue we should not forget is that Trump has been in office for less than 100 days. He has already dramatically reoriented American foreign policy. He has reoriented American trade policy, and his policies are having global impacts. This is apparent from the emerging shifts in global trade, in geopolitical alignments, in defense strategies, and also in environmental commitments. And most importantly, it's clear already in less than 100 days of Trump in office that his main target is China. He's leveraging tariffs and trade policies to disrupt China's export-driven economy. He's also trying to incentivize American companies to reshore manufacturing. That will further weaken China's role as the world's factory.
And this is where there's a great opportunity for India if India is nimble-footed. Mr. Vijay, Professor Brahmachalani, Siddharth Zarabi and Geeta Mohan, as always, many, many thanks for joining me here on this in this conversation on the adversity and the opportunity that lies ahead for India. Can we capitalize on this opportunity remains the biggest question. US President Donald Trump's tit-for-tat tariffs have led to a global meltdown. The US President announced a minimum baseline tariff of 10% on all imports to the United States of America, with higher rates on countries that have the highest trade deficits with the United States of America. So the tariffs vary from 10%, which is the baseline, to 49%. Global economies from the European Union to Australia, Asian giants China, Japan, South Korea, they've hit out at the US tariffs. There are some countries that are talking about meetings to have effective countermeasures in place.
World economy is yet to fully recover from the post-pandemic inflation surge. It's weighed down by record debt and unnerved by geopolitical strife. On top of that, it is now slapped with the latest round of US trade tariffs unveiled on Wednesday.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism.
Within hours of the US President's reciprocal tariff announcement, Brazil's Congress unanimously passed a reciprocity bill to allow its government to retaliate against any country or trade bloc that imposes tariffs on Brazilian goods. China, Japan and South Korea are in an agreement to fight Trump's tariffs together. All three countries are hit hard by Wednesday's announcement.
The US side, under the guise of reciprocity, imposed tariffs on products from many countries, including China. This seriously violates WTO rules and severely damages the rules-based multilateral trading system. China firmly opposes this and will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard its legitimate interests. Japan has repeatedly explained its concerns at various levels and has urged that unilateral tariff measures should not be taken. Despite this, the US government has announced comprehensive tariff measures, which is extremely regrettable. We have serious concerns regarding the compatibility of the WTO agreement and the Japan-US trade agreement.
The US President has slapped all member countries of the European Union with a 20% reciprocal tariff. No one is happy about it.
The US government is therefore treading a path that will only end up with losers. The European Union has the strongest single internal market in the world with 450 million consumers, and that gives us strength. We are available for talks with the US government to avert a trade war, and the President of the Commission has already made this clear. Germany and Europe continue to stand for free trade. We are focusing on cooperation, not confrontation, and we will defend our interests. Europe will respond to the US decision in a united, strong and appropriate manner.
While most countries are hit hard, ranging between 10% to as high as 50% reciprocal tariff by the US President, countries like Russia, Canada, Mexico, North Korea and Cuba were left out of the list. The fact that Canada and Mexico weren't included in Trump's 2nd April tariff announcement does not mean they have escaped trade penalties altogether. The US had already imposed a 25% tariff on imports from both countries earlier this year, with a lower 10% rate on Canadian energy and potash. Additionally, goods entering the US under the US-Mexico-Canada agreement remain exempt from these new duties. But auto parts and other products will face new levies starting Thursday. Bureau Report, India Today.
And there have also been some unintended and some rather strange outcomes from US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff impositions. Norfolk Islands, for example, off the coast of Australia. The population, only 2,000. They've been hit with 29% tariffs. And her and McDonald's Islands, now that's home to penguins, they've been imposed with 10% tariffs. Why? No one knows.
These are the satellite images of an unheard island in the Antarctica, the Heard and the McDonald Islands. It is a part of Australia and no one lives here. But it is caught up alongside global heavyweights in the US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff regime. Heard and McDonald Islands, with no human population, faces 10% tariff for exports to the US. Norfolk Island, another tiny Australian territory, 966 kilometers off the mainland's eastern coast, now faces a hefty 29% US tariff on exports. The rugged volcanic island in the southern Pacific does ship a modest amount of Kentia palm seeds abroad worth less than $1 million a year, and that too mostly to Europe.
Norfolk Island, interestingly, is I think 29%. I'm not sure what Norfolk Island major exports are to the United States and why it's been singled out, but it has.
With 2,188 residents, Norfolk is amused by the tariff strike. The US government data has recorded trade deficits with Norfolk Island for the past 3 years. The island exported $200,000 to a maximum of $700,000 in these 3 years, while its imports from the US stayed at $100,000 in those years. Bureau Report, India Today.
Well, that is all we have for you on this special broadcast of India First. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.
Motorola Razr 50 Ultra comes with Google Gemini. Motorola Razr 50 Ultra comes with Google Gemini.
Hi, I am AI anchor Sana, bringing the top headlines for you, presented by Motorola. PM Modi receives ceremonial guard of honor in Bangkok. Congress MP Imran Masood slams Waqf bill, says will move court against bill. Portals of Yamunotri Dham to open on 30th April Akshay Tritiya at 11:55 am.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices. Amplify your brand with 100 million smart internet viewers. To advertise, mail us at sales@aajtak.com.
हाँ भाई रे मुझे कोई दे दे जार छोड़िए कार लग रहा है क्या बात की अब मुसलमान मान नकली नहीं अकेला वाला समझदा हाँ भाई कितना वो लगता है तब हमसे मत पूछिए हम तुम बताए हुए हैं दूसरे सीजन के 100 एपिसोड लग गए
गाड़ी चलेगी हवा लगेगी
Good evening and welcome. You're watching the news track. I'm Rahul Kamal. What is the impact of Donald Trump's new reciprocal tariffs on Indian consumers, Indian companies, American growth, and on the India economic story? I have some super sharp voices from India and the United States joining me for this special edition of the news track.
67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it.
Trump unleashes punitive global tariffs. Discounted tariff for India.